The saw bit into the river ice with a rhythmic, grating song, a sound that belonged wholly to the end of winter. Each pull sent a shudder up Ilara's arms, a familiar ache in her shoulders she had come to associate with purpose. The air was so cold it felt solid in her lungs, each breath a sharp, crystalline thing. Beside her on the bank, a scruffy, gray-muzzled dog named Boro sat with perfect stillness, his intelligent eyes tracking the slow progress of the steel blade. He did not shiver. He watched her work as if it were the only event of consequence in the entire valley. The ice was 3 feet thick, clear as glass near the surface, shading to a milky blue in its depths. She was not cutting neat squares for the town ice house, the way her father had taught her. She was cutting massive, unwieldy blocks, 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, wrestling them from the river's grip with a system of levers and ropes anchored to an ancient oak. This was the 97th block. She needed 200. From the path above the riverbank, a voice cut through the cold air. "Still at it, girl?" Ilara looked up, shielding her eyes against the glare off the snow. It was Mr. Hemlock, his face a road map of wrinkles carved by 70 winters in this valley. He leaned on a sturdy walking stick, his breath pluming in front of him. "You've been cutting since the thaw was just a rumor. What in God's name do you need with a mountain of ice?" Ilara finished her cut, the block groaning as it separated from the main sheet. She planted her feet, took hold of the rope, and pulled. The block slid reluctantly toward the ramp she'd built. "I have a plan," she said, her own breath short and sharp. It was what she always said. Mr. Hemlock shook his head, a gesture of both pity and disbelief. "A plan. The whole town's talking about your plan, digging a hole behind that little cabin of yours, hauling ice in March. It's unnatural. You store ice to fight the summer heat, not to invite the winter cold into your cellar." He squinted at the pile of immense blocks she had already dragged up the hill, a frozen ziggurat gleaming in the pale sun. "Whatever you're building, it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Wait until the spring rains come. You'll have a mud pit, and then a pond. Wait until next winter. You'll freeze solid in that hole you're so proud of." "It'll work," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She gave the rope another heave. The ice block scraped up the wooden ramp, its immense weight a satisfying strain against her muscles. Boro got to his feet and trotted over, nudging her hand with his cold nose, as if to offer his own silent, steady encouragement. She scratched behind his ears, her gaze fixed on the task. She did not argue. Her father had taught her that you don't win arguments with words. You win them with results. Her father's journals were filled with results. Tucked away in a leather-bound book were his drawings, his calculations, his theories. He had been a man who saw the world not just as it was, but as a collection of forces and principles. "Heat is a coward," he had written in his spidery script. "It always runs from hot to cold. The trick is not to stop it, but to tell it where to go." And below that, a sketch of what she was now building. A deeply buried, heavily insulated chamber filled with winter ice, connected by a network of copper pipes to a small, subterranean living space. A heat exchanger, a thermal battery. He called it the winter well. The principle was simple, maddeningly so. In summer, the melting ice would draw the heat from the living space, keeping it cool. That was the easy part, the part anyone could understand. But his true genius was in the second half of the equation. The freezing of water releases an enormous amount of latent energy, the journal read. Far more than simple cooling. If you can capture the cold of winter in a great enough mass, you can use the phase transition of summer melt to store the absence of heat. Then, in the following winter, you allow a controlled amount of water back into the system to freeze. The energy released by that freezing, it isn't fire, but it is warmth. a steady, low-grade heat, enough to survive. It was a theory. He had never had the land or the time to build it. A logging accident had taken him and her mother 5 years prior, leaving Alara with the small cabin, a few acres of rocky land, and his book of ideas. For 5 years she had survived the conventional way, chopping wood, stocking coal, enduring the brutal valley winters that seemed to get a little longer, a little colder, every year. But the wood was getting harder to find, the coal more expensive. This year she was trying his way. She and Boro hauled the 97th block to the growing mound behind the cabin. It was slow, torturous work. Her hands were a mess of calluses and blisters, her back a constant, dull fire. But with each block that settled into place, a sense of rightness grew within her. This was not madness. It was physics. Later that week, as she was lining the deep pit with sawdust and peat moss, another visitor arrived. Mrs. Gable, a kind woman whose worry was as thick and warm as the stews she was famous for, stood at the edge of the excavation, a covered pot in her hands. "Alara, dear, I brought you some supper. You're working too hard." Her eyes drifted from Alara's dirt-streaked face to the hole in the ground, and the concern in her expression deepened. "Mr. Hemlock says you're digging your own grave." "He's a practical man," Alara said, accepting the stew. The savory steam was a welcome comfort. "He doesn't trust what he hasn't seen." "But a house of ice? Child, what will you do when the real cold comes? You have no wood stacked. I checked your shed. It's nearly empty. The coal delivery men haven't seen you all season. How will you stay warm?" "This will keep me warm," Alara said, gesturing with her chin toward the pit. Mrs. Gable just shook her head slowly, her kindness warring with her common sense. "This is your grief talking. Your father, he was a brilliant man, but he had his head in the clouds. This is the real world, Alara. You need a fire. You need smoke coming from your chimney." She placed a hand on Alara's arm, her touch gentle. "There's no shame in asking for help. The town will help you. We can organize a woodcutting party." "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," Alara said, her gratitude genuine. "But I have to do this." The woman left, her shoulders slumped with the weight of unheeded advice. Alara ate the stew, sitting on the edge of the pit with Boro resting his head on her knee. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of apricot and rose. The valley was beautiful, but it was an unforgiving beauty. She knew the stories of the long winter of '88, when families had frozen in their homes, their woodpiles exhausted. Her father's plan was not about comfort. It was about survival. She looked at the half-finished pit, then at the mountain of ice. She had so much more to do. Spring arrived, and with it, the mud. Mr. Hemlock's prediction came partly true. The area around her project became a quagmire. But the pit itself, which she had painstakingly lined with a thick layer of clay and fieldstones, remained solid. As the thaw accelerated, she worked with a frantic energy, moving the remaining ice blocks into the insulated cavern she had dug. 212 blocks in total, each one a testament to her aching back and raw hands. She sealed the cavern with a thick wooden door she'd fashioned, packing the seams with moss and tar. The ice was now entombed, a frozen heart buried in the earth. Then came the second phase of the work, the living space. Adjacent to the ice cavern, she dug another room, smaller and deeper. She lined it with stone, mortared with clay, and built a low, arched roof of heavy timbers, covering the whole thing with nearly 4 feet of earth. It was a hobbit hole, a root cellar meant for a person. Between the 2 chambers, she laid the copper pipes her father had designed, a complex circulatory system that passed through a large gravel-filled trench. This was the heat exchanger. the heart of the entire idea. Her work did not go unnoticed. The project was now the valley's primary source of entertainment and gossip. Mr. Sterling, the owner of the mercantile and the closest thing the valley had to an aristocrat, made a special trip out to her property. He stood at a safe distance, his fine leather boots already soiled with mud, and looked at the mound of fresh earth that covered her structure. "I've heard the stories, of course," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But to see it with my own eyes, it's a truly remarkable monument to youthful folly." He chuckled. "My dear girl, I admire your industry, I truly do. But this is not how we do things. We have established methods for surviving the winter because they are proven. They work. What is this dirt pile supposed to accomplish?" "It will keep me warm," Elara replied, not breaking her rhythm as she smoothed clay over the entrance to the living chamber. "By what magic? The magic of frostbite and misery?" he scoffed. "I run a business. I sell firewood, I sell coal, I sell the finest wool blankets. People buy them because they are necessities. You, on the other hand, are building a tomb. I hope for your sake you have the sense to abandon this madness before the first snow. I would hate to lose a customer." His words were meant to sting, to humiliate, but Elara felt only a quiet resolve. The doubt of others was like the wind. You could feel it, but it couldn't stop you from laying one stone on top of another. Not everyone saw her work as folly. One afternoon, a young man named Leo, the blacksmith's son, came by. He was quiet, like her, with thoughtful eyes and hands that were strong and stained with soot. He didn't mock or ask dismissive questions. He watched her for a long time as she struggled to fit a heavy stone lintel over the doorway. "You've got the wrong angle," he said finally, his voice low and even. "You need to lift from the back, not the front. Here." He didn't wait for an answer. He moved to the other side of the stone, found his grip, and with a shared nod, they lifted it into place. It settled perfectly. "Thanks," she said, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of a dirty glove. He nodded, his eyes scanning the structure, the pipes, the sealed entrance to the ice cavern. He wasn't looking at it as a joke. He was looking at it like a puzzle. "My father said you were trying to catch winter in a box," he said. "Something like that." "The copper pipes," he said, pointing. "They're for moving the cold?" "And the warmth," she corrected gently. He was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Latent heat. When water freezes, it releases energy. That's what you're doing, isn't it? You're not just storing cold, you're setting up a system to make heat." Elara stared at him. No one else had come close to understanding. They saw ice and dirt. He saw the principle. "My father wrote it all down," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "He was a smart man," Leo said. "Smarter than most people gave him credit for." He looked at her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated respect. "You need any fittings forged for those pipes? Any hinges for the doors? Let me know. No charge." His offer was a crack of light in the wall of skepticism that surrounded her. She had been alone in her work for so long, with only Boro for company, that the simple act of being understood felt as momentous as setting the final stone. She took him up on his offer. He forged beautiful, precise fittings for the pipe junctions, and a set of strong iron hinges and a latch for the heavy inner door to the living space. He never asked for payment, but she left a basket of her late spring foraging, morel mushrooms and wild leeks, at the smithy door. A quiet transaction of mutual respect. Summer came, hot and humid. While the rest of the valley sweltered, Elara spent her evenings in the cool, subterranean dark of her new living space. It was not yet a home. It was a stone-lined cavern with a packed earth floor, furnished with only a simple cot, a table, and a chair. But it was blessedly cool. A small, hand-cranked fan connected to a flue drew the warm air from the room, pulling it through the gravel trench where it was chilled by the pipes connected to the slowly melting ice in the chamber next door. The air that returned was cool and dry. It worked. The first half of her father's theory was proven. She spent the summer months finishing the interior, building shelves into the stone walls, plastering the ceiling with a fine layer of clay, and carving a small nook for her father's journals. She worked by the light of a single lantern, the silence broken only by the drip of water from the pipes, the sound of summer's heat being consumed by winter's captured cold. Boro lay on a cool patch of the floor, thumping his tail contentedly. This was their sanctuary. Outside, the valley buzzed with the usual summer activities: haying, canning, repairing roofs. But the talk often returned to Ilara and her ice cave. The success of its cooling properties was dismissed as a fluke. "Of course it's cool. It's a cellar," Mr. Hemlock grumbled at the Mercantile. "But a cellar is a damp, miserable place in the winter. Just you wait." As autumn approached, a chill returned to the air. The leaves turned, a blaze of glory before the inevitable gray of November. Ilara made her final preparations. She ran the last of the pipes from the gravel bed into the living space, a loop that would, in theory, radiate the gentle heat from the controlled freezing of water she planned to introduce into the system. She stocked the small room with dried goods, books, and tools. She had no woodpile to speak of, only a small stack of kindling for the tiny cooking stove she'd installed, which had its own separate, well-designed flue. Leo visited again, bringing a finely crafted wooden handle for the hand-cranked fan. He looked around the finished space, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It's amazing, Ilara, truly." "It's not finished," she said. "The test is coming." "It will work," he said, echoing her own words from months before. "I know it will." His faith was a shield, but as the days grew shorter and the first flakes of snow began to fall, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Her father's work had been theory. She had turned it into stone and earth and ice. Now, all she could do was wait for winter to be the judge. The first month of winter was unremarkable. A few moderate snowfalls, a string of cold days. The valley settled into its familiar rhythm of hunkering down. Ilara retreated to her underground room. She began the process, introducing a small, steady trickle of water from a cistern she'd built into a separate part of the gravel bed, allowing it to freeze around the coils. As her father's journal predicted, the phase change released a steady, gentle warmth. The temperature in her small chamber held at a consistent 55 degrees. It wasn't the roaring heat of a wood stove, but it was a deep, constant, life-sustaining warmth. There were no drafts. The air was still and quiet. She wore a sweater, but she was never cold. Boro slept soundly, not curled into a tight ball for warmth, but stretched out, relaxed. Above ground, the world was a different story. Around Christmas, the real cold arrived. It came not as a storm, but as a silent, invisible tide of Arctic air that settled over the valley and did not leave. The temperature dropped to 10 below zero, then 20, then 30. It stayed there for a week, then 2. The old-timers, Mr. Hemlock included, admitted they'd never seen anything like it. It was a dry, searing cold that found every crack in every wall. The town's massive woodpiles began to shrink at an alarming rate. People who thought they had enough for the entire winter found their supply half gone by mid-January. The Mercantile's coal supply, which Mr. Sterling had priced exorbitantly, sold out completely. The cold was relentless. Trees in the forest began to split open with gunshot cracks as the sap inside them froze solid. The river was a sheet of iron-hard ice 5 feet thick. Ilara knew of the deep freeze only from her brief trips outside to a small, sheltered privy she had built. The air was a physical blow, stealing her breath and burning her skin. The silence of the snow-covered landscape was absolute and terrifying. Then she would retreat back into her warm, quiet sanctuary, the heavy door sealing out the lethal world above. She sat and read her father's books, mended her clothes, and listened to the almost imperceptible hum of her system working. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, not of triumph, but of deep, quiet thanks for her father's mind and her own stubborn hands. The first sign of the town's desperation came in early February. It was Leo. He appeared at her door, his face rimmed with ice, his breathing ragged. He had trudged through the deep snow for over an hour to reach her. "Ilara," he gasped, stumbling inside as she opened the door. The 55-degree air hit him, and he looked around in disbelief, his body shivering violently from the sudden change. It's warm." "What's wrong, Leo?" she asked, helping him out of his frozen coat and handing him a cup of hot tea from her small stove. "It's the Gables," he said, his teeth chattering. "Their chimney. The mortar failed from the cold. It collapsed. Their house is full of smoke and they can't keep a fire going. Their little girl, Sarah, she's sick. They're freezing, Ilara. They've run out of wood trying to stay warm in just one room." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "And they're not the only ones. The Hemlocks are burning their furniture. Old Mr. Hemlock is too proud to ask for help, but his wife is terrified. The whole valley is falling apart." Ilara didn't hesitate. She pulled on her heaviest coat, wrapped a scarf around her face, and grabbed a lantern. "Boro, stay," she commanded. The dog whined but lay down obediently near the door. "Show me the way," she said to Leo. They stepped out into a world of brutal, alien cold. The snow squeaked under their boots. The air was so still and frigid, it felt like the vacuum of space. The moonlight on the snow was brilliant, but it was a dead, cold light. It was a long, hard walk to the Gables' small farmhouse. When they arrived, the scene was grim. The family was huddled together in the kitchen under a pile of blankets, their faces pale and drawn in the flickering lamplight. The air was icy, and the smell of cold soot hung in the room. Mrs. Gable was trying to warm her daughter's small hands with her own breath. When she saw Ilara, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Ilara, we were so wrong." "There's no time for that," Ilara said, her voice calm and steady. "You need to come with me, all of you, now." There was no argument. They bundled the sick child, Sarah, in every remaining blanket and followed Ilara and Leo back through the frozen night. The journey was a nightmare of stumbling through drifts and fighting the crushing cold. When Ilara finally pushed open the heavy door to her underground home, the wave of gentle, steady warmth that flowed out felt like a miracle. Mrs. Gable began to sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "It's warm," she whispered, unwrapping her daughter. "Oh, my heavens, it's warm." Ilara settled them on her cot and gave them blankets and hot broth. Sarah, her small body shivering, slowly began to relax in the steady heat. "I have to go back," Ilara said to Leo, "for the Hemlocks." Leo, his own body now recovered from the cold, nodded grimly. "I'm coming with you." They found the Hemlocks in a similar state of desperation. The proud old man was sitting in a chair, wrapped in a threadbare quilt, staring at the last few pieces of a broken kitchen chair he was feeding into his stove. He looked defeated, shrunken by the cold. His wife was weeping quietly in the corner. When he saw Ilara in his doorway, a look of profound shame crossed his face. "I was a fool, girl," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "A stubborn old fool." "The time for stubbornness is over, Mr. Hemlock," Ilara said softly. "It's time for surviving." She and Leo led them back as well. Her small subterranean room was now crowded. The Gables and the Hemlocks, neighbors who had gossiped and shaken their heads at her folly, were now huddled together in the warmth of its success, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion, gratitude, and awe. The news spread. The next day more came. The family of the town weaver, their coal long gone, 2 elderly brothers whose well had frozen solid. Even Mr. Sterling, his arrogance shattered by 2 sleepless nights in his grand, drafty house where the temperature had dropped to 40 degrees despite his roaring fireplace, appeared at her door. He did not ask for shelter for himself, his pride wouldn't allow it, but he asked if his wife and 2 young sons could stay. His face was a mask of humility she never thought she would see. "I don't understand it," he said, looking around the warm, dry room, now filled with nearly 15 people. "There's no fire, there's no smoke. What is this place?" "It's my home," Ilara said simply. For 4 more days, the great freeze held the valley in its grip. And for 4 days, Ilara's winter well was an ark. Her small sanctuary housed 23 people. They slept in shifts, shared her preserved food, and spoke in hushed tones, their earlier skepticism replaced by a quiet, profound respect. In the gentle, constant warmth, they were a community again, stripped of pride and prejudice, united by the simple, desperate need for shelter. Ilara moved among them, a quiet, reassuring presence, ensuring everyone was warm and fed. She was not a savior. She was a provider, a caretaker, who had simply listened to a different kind of wisdom. Then, on the 5th day, the temperature rose. It climbed to 0, then to 10 above. The wind shifted, bringing a moist breeze from the south. The iron grip of the cold had broken. One by one, the families returned to their homes to assess the damage. Burst pipes, ruined food stores, dead livestock. The valley was wounded, but thanks to Ilara, it had survived without losing a single soul. The aftermath of the Great Freeze transformed the valley, and Ilara's place in it, forever. The structure was no longer the orphan girl's folly. It became known as the Warm Home, or Ilara's Well. The same people who had mocked her now came to her with notebooks and questions. Mr. Hemlock, his pride now channeled into a fierce, protective respect for her, was the first. "You have to teach us," he said, standing at the entrance to her underground room a week after the thaw. "This can't be the only one. We were fools to doubt you. I was the biggest fool of all. You have to show me how it's done." His apology was in his request. It was an admission that her way was better. Ilara, true to her nature, did not gloat. She simply nodded. "I'll show you," she said. "I have my father's journals." She brought out the leather-bound book. She and Leo, who was now her constant partner in the work, spent the spring and summer helping their neighbors. They didn't just build copies, they improved on the design. They discovered that a certain type of river clay made for better insulation, that pipes with a wider gauge improved airflow. Leo's blacksmithing skills were essential, and he designed a more efficient hand-cranked fan system. The Valley Method, as it came to be called, spread from homestead to homestead. Mr. Sterling, in an act of public penance, paid for all the copper piping and materials for a dozen warm homes, insisting it was the only sound investment he'd ever made. The valley became a different place. The fear of winter, which had always been a sharp, underlying current in their lives, receded. They still stacked wood for cooking and for the cozy cheer of a fire, but the desperate life-or-death hoarding of fuel was a thing of the past. The warm homes provided a baseline of safety, a guarantee against the worst the world could throw at them. Years passed. Ilara and Leo married in a quiet ceremony by the river, the same spot where she had cut the first ice block. They built a small addition onto her cabin, but their true living space, their sanctuary, remained the room underground. It was a place of peace, filled with books and the quiet rhythm of their life together. Boro grew old. His muzzle turned from gray to white, his steps became slower, his intelligent eyes clouded with age. He spent most of his days sleeping on his favorite patch of cool earth in the warm home. One autumn evening, as Ilara sat reading and Leo carved a piece of wood, Boro rested his head on her lap. He gave a soft sigh, a gentle, peaceful exhalation, and was still. His long, loyal watch was over. They buried him on the hill overlooking the cabin, under the shade of the old oak tree that had served as her anchor. Leo carved a simple wooden marker, Boro. He was a good witness. Ilara's grief was a quiet, deep ache, a silence in a space that had always been filled with his steady presence. Decades flowed by like the river in the valley. The story of the Great Freeze and the orphan girl who saved the town became a local legend, told to wide-eyed children on winter nights. Ilara became the quiet matriarch of the valley. She never sought power or praise, but she was given the deepest respect. People came to her for advice not just on building, but on all manner of things. Her quiet, patient wisdom, born of observation and hard-won experience, was a treasured resource. She and Leo raised 2 children, a son and a daughter, who grew up understanding the principles of thermodynamics as naturally as they understood the changing of the seasons. They watched their mother teach others, her hands, now gnarled with arthritis, still able to demonstrate the proper way to mortar a stone or pack an insulating wall. Leo passed away in his sleep one spring, 25 years after Boro. Ilara buried him on the same hill, next to their faithful friend. She continued to live in the cabin, her children and grandchildren nearby. She spent more and more time in the quiet, 55-degree peace of the warm home, the place she had built with her own 2 hands, the place that held the memories of her entire life. It was a testament not just to an idea, but to a life of quiet, persistent action against a chorus of doubt. She lived to be 87 years old. She died as peacefully as she had lived, sitting in her chair in the underground room, her father's journal open on her lap. The entire valley mourned her passing. They had lost their anchor. They buried her on the hill next to Leo and Boro. The town commissioned a single gravestone of dark, river-smoothed granite to mark all 3 spots. They struggled with what to write, how to capture the essence of her life. Mr. Hemlock's grandson, now a grandfather himself, remembered a story his grandfather had told him. "She never argued," he said to the stonemason. "She just did the work." Her answer was always the result. The stone was carved with 3 names, Ilara, Leo, and Boro, and beneath them a simple epitaph, the quietest and most powerful words they could think of, the words that defined her entire existence and the legacy she left buried in the earth of the valley she had saved. It worked. 100 years after her death, the cabin still stood, preserved by the town as a historic site. The mound of earth that covered the warm home was now soft with grass and wildflowers. Children played on it in the summer, rolling down its gentle slope. And every winter, when the snows came and the wind howled down from the peaks, the houses all through the valley, Each with its own version of her winter well remained safe. They remained warm. Her legacy was not in a monument of stone, but in the quiet, persistent, life-giving warmth that radiated from the very ground beneath their feet.